Hi, Steve.
Hello.
Okay, so we're back for another casual conversation. And today we're going to talk about those little pesky saboteur voices that tend to come up for us.
Yeah, the voices that live with us regularly in the back of our brain, trying to take over space in certain situations, some situations more than others.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
I think of it like a little gremlin that's sitting like over here on my, and it's just like this pesky little voice that keeps on saying unkind things sometimes, or just like annoying things, I find.
Yeah, annoying. Normally it is annoying, or it's trying to put us down or hold us down or yeah, just trying to stop us from doing things that we want to do, that kind of stuff. And sometimes I'm like you, I think of it as someone sitting on my shoulder or something, but other times I don't even notice it sitting on the shoulder. It's just absorbed. I'm just absorbed in it. So I think it's me.
You know what? That's so true. Sometimes you do get so engaged in that voice that you're like, oh, yeah, you start listening or paying attention to it in some way that you can't detach yourself from it.
Yeah, it's not useful for us. but yeah, let's talk about it more. How we
Yeah.
can do it.
So we kind of talk about it, calling it like a saboteur or a gremlin, or I think inner critic, kind of that voice that is overly critical or wants things a certain way and isn't happy with how things are unfolding.
Yeah, exactly. You could sort of wrap it up into almost some kind of negative voice, right? It's
Yeah.
normally negative focused, either about ourselves or others. And it's typically sort of a fear-based type of thing, isn't it? Rather than a happy voice promoting us and telling us all the possibilities that are there for us. It's normally the other way, right? You're not good enough. Oh my God, what are you doing? Or they're going to think this, or they're going to think that. It's normally that on that side of the spectrum.
Yeah, there's certainly a type of energy that comes with it, which is draining and overly critical. And I feel my body kind of closing up as I think of it, and wanting to kind of protect myself a little bit from it. So it's that kind of energy that inner critic tends to bring about. So it's funny because when I think of and I look at my own kids when they were smaller, they didn't seem to have that inner critic or that inner voice. But at some point along the way, we develop this inner critic, this kind of voice that is constantly talking smack to us.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, I wonder what's the earliest time you remember for yourself where you actually had like a inner critic voice, or even remember having an inner critic voice? Because
I don't know exactly, but I think I was in elementary school. I, I can think of grade 4 already having that voice. So you're around 9 or 10 at that time. But I can even think of it a little earlier, where I wasn't doing as well in grade 3. I started the year off not doing well in school. And I remember kind of having that kind of voice going, oh, maybe you're just not smart. So I would have been around 7 or 8, which is interesting because my little guy is 7. And I can kind of already see that hesitation that wasn't there. He's still a lot more free with his voice and his dancing and his behavior than I am. But certainly I can already see glimpses of the inner critic. How about you? When do you remember, if you think back, of having that voice starting to talk to you?
yeah, as you were speaking, I was getting like little flashbacks of different things. Like initially, I was thinking school, similar age, like 9, 10, noticing other people getting more special treatment, or more popular kids getting more special treatment, thinking, oh, why am I not getting that? Or what's wrong with me? Why am I not as fun or outgoing? I remember these kind of thoughts. And then when I got even younger than that, just certain relationship with my dad was not, great, and noticing how I was treated versus sort of other people, like my sister and stuff, and that then thinking, well, why that? And then as a result of that, maybe trying to act out in certain ways. And so I guess as we're talking, it sort of goes to show that I think some of these things do start as early as that. These things that you learn based on what your situation is when you're younger, and you sort of learn how to either protect yourself or how to adapt yourself to get something, or to try to get something.
Yeah.
Or you start to make up things about you. You learn about yourself, like, oh, I'm not good at that because I'm not getting that reward or that thing. And so it's really interesting, isn't it, how a lot of it probably traces back to those early formative years.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting there is that it does kind of form, you said protect yourself, right? It does form a bit of a shield to protect ourselves uh, when we're young. Like that is, I think, one of the strategies we use to protect ourselves from the external environment. And it is part of how we develop our identity growing up, is through this voice a little bit as well. Um, I almost feel like it serves some kind of purpose before we have tools and techniques that are a bit more serving and valuable for us later on. But there's a purpose for this voice early on as children.
Yeah, I think it's all about like protection or something. The voice sort of kicks in to try and help you understand the environment you're in. Like, I think as we're born, we probably assume, or there is an assumption, we'll just fit in, and that's why we probably act very happy and, just playful and whatever, like from a super young age. And then when you actually, the more you travel through the environment, let's say over the years, you start to realize that things aren't as perfect, or you need to sort of fit in to the environment. And obviously, if you're lucky and you grow up in an environment where you're totally treated in the most loving way, in terms of your family, your school, your this, you maybe you don't need to adapt so much because it's naturally occurring that you fit in. Yeah. Whereas I think if you don't, from a young age, or you then start to create this, what identity do I need to create to fit into this environment I'm born into or travel through over time? And I think that people that are in that scenario probably end up having to adjust themselves way more than others, and that in a way then creates your identity, your voices, your belief systems, and got all of that other stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is how that voice starts to evolve. And no matter how loving a family structure is, there's always a place that where we need to fit in, right? Schools, for example, are very structured in how they want things to happen, right? And so kids start to learn pretty early on that there's a certain way of being in order to have a happy teacher and good grades. And I think that would certainly help that inner critic, at least give it some ammunition and some fuel around, oh, you're not doing that the way it's supposed to be done.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I've coached clients before where they had really happy upbringings in family, but then ended up, and they were super smart, and they've ended up going to like boarding schools or certain schools, like the really top schools, but they weren't necessarily the highest person in that school or in that class. And as a result of that, we kind of uncovered that they had this inner voice of not being good enough, or never being quite good enough, even though they've had a loving upbringing and they've one of the best, most intelligent people to be in that environment, that school in the first place. Yet that experience in the school still made them feel not good enough. So
Yeah.
it's interesting, isn't it, how we create these conditioned senses or voices inside.
Well, and even in a loving family, you know, parents, I know I'll speak for my own, they, I know with my parents, they wanted me to operate in a certain way. And part of it is they wanted me to kind of behave according to societal, norms. But the other part was they really did feel that that was their way of setting me up for success later on in life, right? Like they saw within them the need to kind of teach me how to survive in the world. And so that kind of brought us to, this is the way you operate. This is how we get ahead in the world. This is what needs to be done. And I think whenever we attach ourselves to a certain way of having to be, we're kind of fertilizing the ground for this saboteur to talk to us more loudly, to have opinions about how things are actually turning out. Because as much as, we want our parents' love, we want the love of the people around us, we want to fit in, things never go exactly as we want. And so then there's a delta and a gap that needs to be explained. And so the inner critic comes along and says, well, maybe you're just not good enough. Maybe you're not meant to do this, or whatever it is that
Yeah.
that particular saboteur expresses itself.
Yeah, you said something there about attachment. I think that's a key word in the whole thing. For me, it's like the attachment we have to the thought. And we've talked about this a little bit in other conversations we've had about, believing your thoughts, hearing the thought, but not necessarily believing it. But I think what happens often, and happened to me a ton in my life, is this attachment to the thoughts that they're true, particularly the negative ones, and feeling like my life depended on that thought, or my identity depended on that thought. When I think back, there were so many times over years I had massive issues with the way I looked. I had constant thoughts of not being good enough, not looking good enough. It was obsession. It was like an obsession, right? Because I was attached to the thought. I believed that I didn't look my best today, and it drove a lot of my crazy behaviors. People didn't realize this was happening, but it was all up here in my head. Yeah. And same with playing out in work environments, of feeling not good enough, never, always having imposter syndrome, getting these decent jobs but never feeling like I deserve them, never feeling good enough, because I was attached to the thought that about it. But if I just heard, if I understood then how to hear the thought and actually question it and go, well, is it actually true? It would have been a whole other story really. But I didn't have that understanding at that time to really be able to differentiate and discern the difference between the thought and the actual truth.
I think that has been probably my biggest aha when it comes to the saboteur, is that I don't actually have to believe a word it says. And I don't have to get rid of it in order not to believe it. So when I was first even learned of the fact that we just have this, we all have it. It's an innate kind of risk management type of system that's neurologically wired into us, but doesn't necessarily serve us. First, it was just the ability to detach myself from that voice, right? And then second, it was, oh, I don't actually have to get rid of it. Because my first thing was, oh, how do I get rid of this thing? I don't want it. Like, it doesn't serve me. How do I do that? And so I started to fight with it. And what I had to learn was, okay, it's going to be here. I could probably, and it's been my experience that I've been able to quiet it down. But actually, when it comes up, I actually can just be aware of it without fighting it, without believing it, without making it mean anything. It can just be a random thought that comes up without any attachment.
Yeah, no, I completely get where you're coming from. It's like when you start fighting with it, I think the good thing actually, when you're aware that it's not, I think we did talk about this before, when you're aware it's not necessarily reality, it's a thought, and you can step back and just observe it and look at it. It's sort of, it's interesting to observe your thoughts. When it feels strange to talk about, to some people maybe think it's a bit strange, but when you actually try and notice that, oh my God, I'm able to now notice my thought from a distance, it's really weird. It's like splitting yourself in two and then just looking at it and saying, oh, that's a crazy thought over there. Or it's interesting that I'm constantly thinking that, what if I didn't think that? What if I did something different? Like, it's just sort of taking a step back and questioning whether there is another way to do things. It's definitely served me a lot over the last few years, particularly, to do that. And you can actually get to the point where you can nip it in the bud quite quickly as soon as you notice it. For me, it's about noticing, because those thoughts, whether it's imposter syndrome, inner critic, fear, whatever, it plays out for me in the body. Like, I start to feel anxious. So to me, anxiety always tends to relate to those thoughts. So as soon as I feel anxious now, in any way, it's like a trigger to my brain to go, oh, there's some anxiety, stop everything, pause. What's going on up there? What is going on in there? Oh, that record's playing, or that record. It sounds so simple, but when I do that, I'm consciously doing it. Whereas normally what happens is I'm unconscious. I'm just unconsciously hearing the thoughts, acting out with them. And it's a massive difference in terms of how, yeah, how things play out. I don't know what happens with you when you get these thoughts now.
Yeah. I think I do a very similar process that you described there, which is when I'm able to catch myself in the fact that I am in that thought, I start just kind of getting curious about the thought and detaching from it. I remind myself that it's not me, that it's a random pattern thought that has come up because it's come up before. And so because it's come up before, because it's come up many times before, it's just patterned in to randomly show up every so often. But it doesn't mean anything about what's happening, really. And so when I'm able to kind of allow that distance between the thought and me, I can feel myself calming down. I can feel myself opening up a bit. And I don't hold things as strongly. Like the saboteur, I find, is very black and white, right? It's this way or no way. You're right or you're wrong. You're good or you're not, right? And when I'm able to detach and just realize this is just a random pattern thought, it's what the mind was designed to do. It's not who I am. It's not meaning anything about what's going on or how I should act or behave or move forward, then it calms me down and it allows me to be more creative. It opens me up. I don't feel so in it.
Yeah, yeah. No, I get it. I think for me, it's just about really understanding that nothing bad, nothing that bad is ever really going to happen. I mean, obviously there's a very minor percentage, you know, we never know what's exactly going to happen, but 99.9% chance, percent of the time, we're not, you know, we're not about to die, you know. I think our bodies and our brains back through the ages is all are built to survive, right, and to keep safe and keep alive. And now we're not in that world anymore, but I think our genetics remember that. and I think it's our job is to discern the difference between these life and death thoughts versus just thoughts that are not life and death, as black and white as I can put it. You know, it's our self-worth and our sense of self doesn't come down to whether our boss, you know, loves everything we do, or whether we write the perfect report, or if that friend thinks I didn't respond quick enough on the text message. Like, you know, my old life, when I used to act, I would feel that my life is at stake if I upset that person, or I'm not perfect. And the reality is it's not. And now I really get that. It's taken a long time, but I really get that, and I believe it, I feel it. And actually it's so freeing to realize that most things are not that critical. You know, our self-worth is way more than all these physical things. And it's just, I think it's just about building a muscle of that, to really realize that every day. Like for me, every day I have to genuinely think about this each day as the day pans out. And remember, like we were saying before about choosing your state, it's all part of that process of every day choosing to put myself first, my physical and mental health first, which includes not believing all these thoughts, noticing when they come in, and just like flowing through the day and not getting pulled in and wrapped up in all this crap that can happen around you. And the more you do it, you just like building the muscle, and everything just flows a lot easier.
Yeah. And I think that really is the secret to this, because if there was a secret, is that this kind of thing, because I know I've coached a lot of people with, well, we all have imposter syndrome to a certain extent at some point in our life, and we all have the inner critic. But I've coached some people with some really strong imposter and inner critic type of, at a time when they're really in it. And there's this desire to have like that secret or that magic pill that you just take and it's gone forever. And the reality takes time and effort. And it speaks to exactly what you're describing, which is it is a muscle, right? These pattern thoughts have been going on for decades for many of us. And so the idea that overnight we can all of a sudden change the random thoughts that come into our mind is is ludicrous. It's just not how we operate. And even when we become, we develop the muscle of thinking positively or reframing or calming ourselves down or just seeing something as a thought and not bringing it in as an identity, as who we are, as us. Even when we do that, those
Mm.
random thoughts of negative kind of will continue to come, just not as often, and they won't stay as long. But the idea is to continue the practice. And I tend to have to remind myself and remind my clients when they're in the work of doing this, that it's not a destination. It's really a journey. It's like a practice over time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because although I've talked about like my own process there, it's not that the thoughts don't come in, it's how I manage them now versus how I managed them before.
Yeah.
So it's not about eliminating the thoughts or the ego, our own sense, these things that sharp, they're always going to be there because we're human beings. They must be there for a reason other than just to purely keep us safe. Who knows, but essentially it's how you manage. It's like everything, it's how you manage anything. Things will always happen in the world around you in life, but again, it's not, you can't really change them. It's how you manage them, how you respond to them. It's the same with these thoughts and these limiting voices and all of that stuff. But it is possible to manage them, and again, it takes a bit of time. And people that say to me sometimes, oh, but it's easy for you to say I'm just not like that, or I can't, it's hard for me. I always say, well, how much have you tried? I say this with clients, like, well, how much have you tried? When have you consistently for 30 days committed to a daily practice of that you will notice your thoughts in the day, and at the end of the day write down, did I notice these voices today, or something like that, a process. Because it's so easy to say, oh, I can't change, or they're just part of me, these voices. Well, they are up until now, because you've never been to the mind gym to try and build a new muscle. I often say as well, it's a bit dramatic, but if your life depended on it, if your life depended on better managing these voices in the next month, you would put more energy into sort of trying it. Trying to build that mental muscle. It's all about just the willingness and the intention of trying something new. And I'm not trying to say it's all easy, because it's not, but it isn't as hard as you think when you start to try it and start to try and try different ways of noticing it. And yeah, because I can test them. I used to be completely overrun with thoughts, fears every day of my life for decades. So it's definitely possible to shift out of it a little bit.
Yeah, it's Daniel Siegel calls it the window of tolerance. So when you're in the window of tolerance, you're comfortable, and your inner critic is typically a little quieter. And then all of a sudden you're kind of a little bit outside of your window of tolerance, and things get a little rockier, right? And so what you're talking about is you've expanded what your window of tolerance looks like, and we all have a different window, right? But the idea is that we can get a sense of where we are and how we actually can start to expand that window of tolerance through daily practice. And one of the things that I love that Rich Litvin says all the time, because I know for my clients and for me as well, in the past, I used to think that my imposter used to mean I was on the wrong path. Right? Maybe I've chosen wrongly. Maybe this isn't the way I'm supposed to be. Like, that was a part of my intuition coming through, is where I misinterpreted the inner critic. And so rather than that, Rich Litvin says, well, maybe it's actually just a sign that you're out of your comfort zone, right? That you are stretching yourself, that you're in the process of growing, that you've taken on a challenge that will expand you as a human being. And I love that, because it becomes almost a positive cue for what you're doing rather than a negative cue for what you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of imposter syndrome, often people with imposter syndrome are some of the smartest people, the most valuable people to an organization, but the fact that they care so much often shows in the imposter syndrome, because they've got strong values around, doing a great job, and sort of delivering value, which is a good thing if you look at it through that lens. I think it's just so it's like we were saying earlier, if you step back and notice it, you can say, okay, this imposter syndrome is showing up. What's behind it? I want to do a good job. I want to do this. I want to do that. Start to sort of deconstruct it a bit, but without some of the drama, and just sort of noticing, okay, yeah, fair enough, I want to do a good job, but actually, is it, is it pushing a bit far now? Am I pushing it? If it's turning to anxiety, then actually that's when, like you said, the word saboteur, your saboteurs coming in, you're self-sabotaging yourself. You started as a value of wanting to do a good job because that's meaningful for you, but now it's turning into self-sabotage. So I think it's good to sort of know when you're reaching that limit, because that's often what happens with our values. They start meaningful and then they go into overdrive.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, and it's because so often at some point with my clients, they'll say, but if I lose that part of me, will my performance decrease? Like, that's how I've gotten to where I am, is this kind of negative voice that has pushed me to do more, and I think that's a real misinterpretation, because there's a value there around excellence or performance or whatever it is for that person, but they've gotten to a point where the costs start to outweigh the benefits of it, right? And I always kind of use this, like, here's where that's a value, and here is where it becomes a reactive tendency and like a cost to you. So to your point, knowing where you are there, like, am I living in value and it's energizing me and it's how I want to show up and it's bringing me joy and it's, it's fulfilling, even if it's not joyous in the moment? Or is it draining? Is it like making me do things I really don't want to do? Like, then you're in the cost side of things.
Yeah, no, definitely. And for me, the cue of that again is the body noticing it. Like, I mean, as soon as I go into anxiety, and I normally know my value, something that I value or that I'm operating against value, is turning into more of the sabotage. So it's like, for example, I have a value around serving others and being being a good person and providing value to others and serving others. So I'm a nice person, right? But so I always used to justify, when people used to say I'm a people pleaser, and I justify it by saying, oh, yeah, but I'm a nice person, I have a value around serving others. But actually, if I serve others and I don't have this anxiety, then it's just, I'm honoring my values by doing that. But actually, as soon as anxiety comes up, it means that yes, I'm serving others, but it's going to overdrive. Like, oh my God, if I don't serve that one other person or help that other person, they're going to think this, and then oh yeah, I'm in sabotage mode. I've been hijacked. I've been hijacked by the voice now, away from my normal state, my sort of natural state, and I'm now over here. So it's, again, I always think anxiety is a good cue. Not that we shouldn't have anxiety, but it is a good cue for stopping, pausing, and looking at what is actually going on here through a constructive lens, not through a anxiety lens.
Yeah. Okay, so how about we leave people with one tip on how, if they're able to notice the voice, name the voice, how do we start to kind of manage that voice? What do we do then? One tip, what would you say?
Manage the voice. Let me think. Well, for me, my tip, again, I probably sound like a broken record, but it's, as soon as I notice anxiety, stop, pause. And I genuinely do this during the day multiple times. If it's not just anxiety, if I sense a feeling of rushing or pushing, because I want to live daily in a chilled way. Like, I want to get through, even if I'm in a stressful job or in a family situation or whatever, I still want it to be smooth. So I try and kind of slow down as much as I can. But if I notice myself rushing, I know that I've gone into anxiety or fear mode or something. So I stop. I have to just stop everything and say, just stop. It's as simple as that. Stop, pause, breathe. That's the first step. And then someone might say, oh yeah, but a minute later it will come back. And then maybe you stop again. you stop, because I think the extended tip would be, don't accept that you have to live with that sense of rush and anxiety and stress, because we feel that we do, because we've lived with it for so long and everyone's living with it around us, so we think it's normal. But actually there is another way, by stopping and noticing it and going, actually, I don't want to live with this anymore, so I'm going to keep interjecting with it, so interjecting and pausing. And so if you do that, I think that will make a huge difference to noticing, and the first step towards starting to reduce it a bit and manage it a bit differently.
Yeah, I So what I heard there was be aware of it, like bring conscious awareness to being in that spot of recognizing that voice, and then stopping, pausing, breathing, and interrupting that thought process with a different state, with a different way of being.
Yeah, exactly. And making a choice. Part of that is making a choice. At least for me, this is my, I don't want
Yeah.
people what to do, but for me, I've told myself, I'm not willing to live with that constant anxiety or putting myself down or not being good enough anymore. I just don't want to deal with it. So therefore I'm choosing that every day. So it's worth, for me, it's worth stopping and noticing and creating a new habit.
Yeah.
Everything is definitely easier and easier to manage. So that it's, for me, it's worth doing. And so yeah, if others want to try that, do it and see what happens.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, for me, so I'm going to talk, I have so many different saboteurs. Like I've done the work, right? So have you, where you start to kind of notice these different voices, and they all are slightly different. But my main one is, I call her Ms. Perfectionist. And I just name her when I see her. Like I like, oh, there's my Ms. Perfectionist coming through. And I almost in my mind go, yeah, there she is. Okay, I get it. You want to do things right. And I just, similar to you, I kind of accept for what she wants for me in a good sense, and accept that she's probably not doing it. Well, she's not doing it in the right way. She's not doing it in a way that serves me, but I name her. I'm like, yeah, I know you want me to do a good job. And then I go into conscious choice. I get into my body, I breathe, so, Positive Intelligence by Shirzad Chamine. He talks a lot about mental fitness and getting back into your body, interrupting that thought process with rubbing your hands or breathing, or really acutely tuning into sound or vision or any of that. So I do that, and that's helped me a lot. And then I ask myself, what do I need to do now? Like, what do I want to do now? How do I want to proceed from a conscious, intentional place? So name it. Like there's a bit of an embracing for the positive intent that it has, that happens. And then I interrupt it with some sensations, some bodily, kind of one of the senses. And then I go into choice. I think those are the kind of, I don't know if I do all four of those steps every single time, but that is some of the steps that I take when I notice it.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, the other thing that comes up for me as you were talking is around this word action. And I often say that sort of action can be an antidote to anxiety. And I genuinely believe that. What I mean, I guess, is that we spend so much time in our minds thinking things through, or imposter world, or self-sabotage world. And we spend so much time thinking that we're not actually doing anything or taking any action. So I would always say, if you're thinking, whether it's about family situation, work, partner, whatever, maybe just set yourself a mantra that today I'm going to be all about action. Or in this moment when you've stopped and reflected and stepped back, go, okay, what action can I do? Because genuinely, when you start to take one or two actions to something, you get movement. And when you get movement forward, the world suddenly looks different. Yeah. So I would definitely say that's a good tip.
Yeah, well. I love that tip. That's a great one for sure. Okay, well, I think that's it. Anything else that we would add at the end, Steve?
No, not for now. I think that's good for now. We can do a part 2.
Okay, sounds good. There's a lot here for sure. And I know we all have heard our inner critic and have been impacted by them. But there's, I guess, there's some, what's the word I'm looking for? A feeling that at least we're all in it together. We all kind of, we're not unique in having a saboteur. We're not unique in having an imposter. It's how we're wired, and we've got some choice and power in how it impacts us.
Yeah, that's a good one, because just recognizing and remembering that, especially I think in like a work environment, remembering that everyone on your Zoom call or in your office is all dealing with their own inner voices. You don't see it because they all look like perfect and that they're doing it. But behind the scenes, half of them have imposter syndrome, or they're worrying about their own life. They're not even looking at you or caring what you're doing, but, but our mind makes up everything else. So just remembering that is also another good bit of advice.
Yeah, I love that. Think about the one person in your life, whether you know them personally or not, that you think is the most impressive person, the person who you think has been able to accomplish the most astounding things, that person has an inner critic. That person has an imposter. That person has these things because that's what it means to be human.
I was about to say the same thing, because they're a human being.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, another great conversation. We'll catch you next time.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. See you next time, Lisa.
Bye.